Mail everybody, I'm Cantonese Cat. Hey everybody, Cantonese Cat here. I'm not sure if I'm on yet. If I am on, you guys need to let me know. I am still trying to figure out this whole live stream thing. So let's see. I'm going to refresh it and see whether or not it is live. I think I am. If you guys see me on the chat, yes. Yes, let me know if you guys can hear me, and if you guys can, I'm just going to start yapping, okay? Alright, I guess I'll start yapping. I want to talk about a few things here. I know you guys want to talk about a lot of different things, but I just want to do a little bit of a stream because I got in about, 45, 50 minutes. I have a whole PowerPoint stack here ready for you because I am just sick in the head like that. And somebody's already asked about Tesla. Well, I'm not sure if I'm going to do individual chart requests today, but I'm happy to kind of talk about overall in terms of what I'm thinking. A lot of people think the market is going to crash. A lot of people looking at the bearish divergences on the indexes and RSI and all that. I just want to talk about three things. First, I want to talk about this copper and gold ratio thing. This is something that Rick who's been around for years, by the way. I think I found his account really start around 2021, 2022, and he does these really cool psychoanalysis. One thing that I picked up on is this copper versus gold ratio. I guess the whole idea is where liquidity is being trapped in. Gold has utility, great, but copper really is more, I guess, more reflective of the industrial activity is more reflective of the economy. And a lot of times you go into cycles where copper underperforms gold until it doesn't. Gold generally has a pretty decent run, and then copper takes over. And whenever copper starts to take over, that's when things start to look a lot better. We are looking at a comparison chart here. I'm going to basically just show you a bunch of comparison charts here. I spent the last 2 hours, 3 hours just looking at this. I was quiet. I was looking at all this stuff. I was looking at copper and gold versus Bitcoin versus different international markets versus different sectors, because a lot of people are talking about sector rotation. Look at large caps, small caps. So let's just kind of take a look at it and see. I'm going to first of all compare everything to copper versus gold and give you an idea in terms of why I'm looking at it. The other thing is also to compare everything to IWM or Russell 2000, which are the small cap stocks, which is the most economically sensitive, which actually shows you a pretty good picture in terms of what's happening when it comes to economic activity, when it comes to economic cycles. And then last, I'm going to talk about whether or not Bitcoin is actually a good reflection of what the economy is doing, what the cycle is actually doing, because I actually think it's a pretty messy indicator. But anyway, looking at copper versus gold, if you're looking at the bottom chart here, these are monthly charts, by the way. I'm just going to talk about monthly charts, so I don't really care about the day-to-day or week-to-week fluctuations. I don't really give a crap about any of that. Looking at the monthly charts here, what I do see here is the copper versus gold ratio at the bottom. And whenever it ends up bottoming, whenever copper ends up bottoming over gold and ends up having some slight outperformance, that's usually when you have the parabolic bull market starting for Bitcoin. From here on out, really since the great financial crisis, you're talking about 2011 bottom here, whenever it makes a big run like that, that was a parabolic bull trend of Bitcoin. Whenever it bottomed over here, and when it made a move up there, that was that big giant parabolic move of Bitcoin. Whenever it bottomed over here and made an up run over here, that was the parabolic bull trend of this Bitcoin. Guess what's happening right now? The ratio is hitting that trend line again. And this has really been absolutely crazy parabolic move to the downside here to hit that trend line. And I think we got some reaction out of it. I'm not saying that we're going to bottom here, Bitcoin. Sure, it can keep on bottoming over here for a few months, and the Q1, Q2 for 2026 can be extremely sad, I suppose, is possible. But what if this is it? I mean, it looks like we had a pretty close to a touch over here, another touch over there, and you have basically this big parabolic downtrend over here has been going for about 5 years. Can it end in 5 years already? Can copper finally do something against gold? Is that where liquidity is finally going to end up rotating over? Does that end up bringing on the Bitcoin parabolic move that's going to come soon? Is that what's going to happen? I don't know. But looking at this, when this bottoms over here, generally you have relative weakness for Bitcoin that happened for months, right? Here it happened for about 5 months. Here it happened for about 2 or 3 months over here. It happens about 2 or 3 months over there. Here it happens for about 5-6 months over here. I think we are at a relatively, very similar point between the two. It looks like we might be getting ready for a little bit of a trend shift over here. I don't know. Now, you guys, if you hear this, please type on the chat. Let me know that you hear me, because I've had problems with live stream before, and I want to make sure I'm not just talking to nobody. Because it's important that I don't want to do this again. The next chart here is Ethereum. Ethereum it doesn't have as long of a history, so I don't have that much data point as much as Bitcoin, but it's basically very, very similar. Whenever you have the bottoming of this copper and gold ratio that led to a parabolic bull run in Ethereum, there is a couple months of delay over here. Same thing happened over here that led to the bottoming of Ethereum and went up having a bull run after that. I do wonder whether or not we're going through a very, very similar thing over here and over here. That is another thing. Thank you so much for letting me know that everything is fine. I need to know that, because if you don't let me know everything is fine, how am I going to let you know everything is fine when it's crashing? Anyway, Ethereum is basically doing what you would expect it to do based on copper and gold ratio. Looking at others is the cryptocurrency market cap excluding the top 10 coins. So you're talking about excluding Bitcoin, excluding Ethereum, excluding XRP, excluding some of the larger cap stuff. These are really more like the degen kind of stuff. And you're looking at the copper versus gold ratio. Yeah, I mean, generally that leads to a parabolic bull run on the others when it comes to their market cap. Like, altcoins generally do very well. Why hasn't altcoin done anything? Was it because copper versus gold has been absolutely sucking for about 5 years? Maybe. Are we at a point that we can potentially have a little bit of a reversal? Maybe. I don't know, right? All I can see is I'm just looking at these different data points over here. Another thing to look over here is copper versus gold ratio versus Bitcoin dominance. Bitcoin dominance tells you the percentage of Bitcoin, or percentage of the cryptocurrency market cap that belongs to Bitcoin. And whenever you have Bitcoin dominance going up, generally is actually not that big of a risk-on environment, especially when it comes to crypto, because Bitcoin might end up doing well, but the rest of the cryptocurrency market cap just ends up sucking and sucking and sucking. And it's been doing that for years. We know that. Is it because copper versus gold ratio just kept on sucking too, right? Because liquidity just simply hasn't really rotated into a true risk-on environment. The last true risk-on environment really was here. Right. From 2020 to 2021, that was a very risk-on environment, right? And you also have a little bit of a mini risk-on environment around 2016, 2017, 2018, until you get to the really, shaky stuff. A lot of people saying, oh, it's because of rate hikes, or, Jerome Powell, and also tariff scare whenever Trump came to office. Well, it could just be because liquidity was heading back towards gold, because liquidity wasn't really, getting there to bring on a risk-on environment. Maybe that's what it is. I don't know, right? With that said, looking at this, you see that this is a lot shorter cycle, right? So that's why you have plummeting of Bitcoin dominance. That's when you have an altcoin season over there. And whenever you ended up hitting the top over here, where copper versus gold has topped, you basically have a little bit of risk off. And that went all the way into 2020. And you have a risk-on environment whenever that ends up happening. And you have plummeting of Bitcoin dominance over here again. I wonder whether or not we are at a juncture of time where copper-gold ratio is actually telling us that, hey, maybe Bitcoin dominance is getting ready to trump. Just even here, whenever you have the bottoming of this ratio, you already have this weakness on Bitcoin dominance. We're seeing weakness here in Bitcoin dominance. I see these two very, very similar junctures over here. Potentially over here too. You see a little bit of weakness on Bitcoin dominance over here before it starts plummeting. I wonder whether or not that's going to be the case. Doge is doing very, very badly over the last few months. It's just to say the least, right? Well, I'm just going to say that Doge has been touching this trend line, just like copper and gold touching that trend line. Pretty interesting. It doesn't have long enough history for me to really confirm and get additional data point. But if it is going to bottom, I think this might be a potential area where it could be. If the copper and gold ratio has bottomed, I cannot guarantee you that that's the case. But it certainly seemed to be a good area. Now, with that said, these things are monthly charts. Monthly charts basically mean that these things can last for months, right? Over here, the bottoming process took like 4 months. Over here, the bottoming process takes about 6 months. it might be bottoming, but I don't know. A touch of trend line, it could be bottoming, but hey, maybe I should redraw the trend line. Maybe trend should go down a little bit. I don't know, right? All I know is I think we're entering into an area where the risk reward ratio is skewed towards reward, most likely based on probability. Right? It's all a probability game. I cannot guarantee you anything, but it's interesting to see that Doge basically has sucked for about 4 or 5 years, just like copper and gold ratio has sucked for 4 or 5 years. It's just kind of ridiculous how these things are very well aligned, right? And Doge does usually end up having a little bit of a lag by a few months. Whenever the copper and gold ratio goes up, Doge ends up lagging usually for a few months. But usually the top of Doge is usually when the copper and gold ratio tops, right? Like, I'm not making this up. Usually that's when these things usually end up being aligned. XRP also seems to lag copper and gold ratio by a few months. The interesting thing here is that they usually top at around the same time too. And the interesting thing here is XRP so far this cycle, you have a little bit of a pre-pump over copper and gold, but it's showing weakness because it's just simply the cycle, the economic cycle, the liquidity cycle just simply hasn't really gone true risk on quite just yet. It might be finding a bottom over here or near here because the copper gold ratio is finding a bottom at this trend line. Maybe. It's hard to say for 100% sure, but it is looking like we are near a bottoming area for XRP looking at this ratio. ARK Fund, what do we have here? ARK Fund tends to front run the copper and gold ratio over the last 3 cycles. You can see that even over here, whenever you have a downtrend over here, ARK actually did pretty well over here for 3 years. It just haven't really had that parabolic run quite just yet. But whenever you have the plummeting of this copper and gold ratio, even ARK Fund struck over here for about 2 or 3 years. You see that, right? Over here is a little bit different. Actually front ran this bottoming over here by about 2 or 3 years. Actually been extremely decent here for ARK here. But we are at a juncture where we're seeing some relative weakness over here whenever it ends up touching a trend line down here and down here and down here. We've been seeing some relative weakness here, here, and here. It's very, very similar in terms of the cycle. Looking at NDX, which is just basically NASDAQ, which is just basically QQQ, you are looking at the large caps, the NASDAQ 100 stocks. These are some of the biggest stocks there is in the market. A lot of people are worried that by looking at the weakness is a hard time breaking through resistance. It must mean that we have a crash downwards, just like we had over here, just because we couldn't break out, you might have a downward move, right? Well, I'm circling a few things here. The reason why I'm circling a few things here is because these are the exact same spots as to when copper and gold ratio had bottomed. And what we are seeing here is that whenever you have the copper and gold ratio bottom over here, you actually have just the QQQ large cap just doing absolutely nothing. It does nothing for months, right? How many months has it done nothing in 2021? Probably the entire year. How many months did it do nothing over in 2016? Probably about like 6 months. How many months have it done nothing over here in 2020? Well, you can say, oh, that was not nothing. It was plummeting all the way down here during COVID era. But if you essentially look over here, it did nothing for about 3 or 4 months, even though it's kind of ridiculous to say now. But it really did nothing. It was just huge volatility here. But it's it ultimately just probably just ended where it was before, when the copper and gold ratio has bottomed. Here, what have we done? We've done nothing here for about 4 or 5 months. Did it crash because you have a hard time breaking through resistance here? Now we just have another leg up. Did it crash because we have a hard time breaking resistance? Now we just have another leg up here. I mean, it crashed over here, sure. I can never predict that you're not going to have a flash crash. Flash crash can happen anytime. I did not predict the flash crash. The flash crash was going to happen back in April 2025, but it happened anyway. Next thing you know, it was a flash crash, and it didn't really matter. Just scrapped liquidity, went to a huge liquidity zone, back tested the previous cycle high here, and just went a lot higher. Here, we have done nothing here for about 5 months when copper and gold ratio is bottom. We've seen this over and over again, right? This is not anything unusual. If history has taught us anything, I think the probability of it doing nothing or have potentially, yeah, you can have a flash crash. I think that's probably a Bible crash. It's always possible, but the possibility of it doing nothing, just going sideways, is actually, relatively not small, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Looking at all the individual stocks over here, I just want to look at a lot of the large cap stocks, there's a lot of people worry about Apple, a lot of people worry about Microsoft, a lot of people worry about all kinds of large cap stocks. What they actually trend all the way back a couple of decades. I can actually look at it in comparison with copper and gold ratio. All of these large cap stocks, Apple basically front run. It's kind of like art fund. It front runs the copper and gold ratio bottoming for like a couple of years. And then next thing you know, whenever you have the copper and gold ratio bottoming, actually you have a parabolic bull trend here. Copper and gold ratio, risk on, right? Parabolic bull trend. Copper and gold ratio bottom, risk on, right? Parabolic bull trend. Copper and gold ratio bottom, risk on, parabolic bull trend. Copper and gold ratio bottoming, maybe risk off, maybe we go down to zero. I don't know. That's just low probability. Microsoft, what happened? Well, Microsoft actually just closed this like monthly gap over here. I when I saw the gap, I was like, next thing you know, it just had a parabolic move up and like a little overextended here. It basically did what Bitcoin did, had a double top over here. Next thing you know, it was just plummeting down here. The fact that Microsoft is closing this monthly gap right around now, which I think is completely reasonable for it to do, and Bitcoin has also plummeted around the same time to the current level at a huge liquidity zone, that actually makes me wonder. I actually think that there's a higher probability that Bitcoin probably bottomed, and this is a flash crash, and it's probably going to go up from there, especially when copper and gold ratio is bottomed. But look at what happened before, right? Bottomed, parabolic move up for a few months, right? Bottomed, man, this thing just kept going for like 3 years. Bottomed, right? Parabolic move up over here, bottomed, we're going to zero. That's the theory out there. Nvidia, same thing, right? Bottom, well, it did nothing over here. I guess back then it really wasn't like a large cap stock. It probably may not be correlated with the market. I don't know. You can make up all kinds of narrative excuses to justify that. But yeah, copper and gold ratio bottom over here. What happened? Nvidia went up there for about 2 or 3 years, right? Copper and gold ratio bottom over here. What happened? Parabolic move up for Nvidia. Copper and gold ratio bottom over here. What happens? Nvidia going to zero, right? These are logical conclusions to draw, because that's not what happened in the past. So you have Microsoft, you have Nvidia, and then I have Amazon too. Amazon's also showing some relative weakness here, where we got, well, what happens when you have the copper and gold ratio bottoming? Well, you have some relative weakness here until it's not. What happens when copper and gold ratio bottom? You have some relative weakness here in Amazon until it's not. What happens when gold? I'm just repeating myself. You see relative weakness here until it's not, right? Parabolic move up. What happens over here when copper and gold bottom? Relative weakness until it goes down to zero. Right? Another theory here, going to zero in my I love these chats, guys. Thank you so much. Welcome, Liv. Welcome, Vivian. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Gary. And thank you for joining this random live chat that I was going to record anyway. And I will be recording this, so don't worry if you missed the live stream. Go enjoy times with your family. Hug your daughter. Hug your husband. Kiss your mistress. Whatever you want to do. Usually at these hours, don't let me stop you from your live. Come back and listen to my live later. Copper and gold, IWM. IWM, Russell 2000, very important economic indicator as far as I'm concerned, because this is basically the small cap stocks of the US market. These are the backbone of the US economy, and if it does well, I really have a hard time thinking that the economy is going to crash and the recession is coming. Copper and gold ratio, bottom, move up for about 3 years, bottom, move up for about a year and a half, bottom, move up for about a year and a half, bottom. IWM is going to zero. Anyway. This is another interesting chart here. It tells you a little bit more about the risk-on sentiment. Usually when small caps overperform large caps, you have more of a very risk-on type environment happening, right? That was true during 2020, 2021. That was true during that period of time around 2016. That was also true for a very brief period of time, around late 2011. Whenever the copper and gold ratio bottom, you usually have outperformance of the small cap over large caps. That's kind of what's happening right now, except that people are not that excited about it. Well, why are they not excited about it? The small caps actually have a lot of financials, they have a lot of industrials, they have a lot of utilities, they have a lot of these like smaller companies, right? That by definition they're small caps, and by definition they're not like you have these really kind of crazy small cap companies. They're like quantum companies that belong to either BM, but the majority of it is more industrial, is more like consumer staples, more like your backbone of the U.S. economy, right? So those things are finally playing catch up, and I think that might be why. And I'm going to go for some of the sector analysis later. That might be why you're seeing that kind of rotation, but I think it's probably going to end up being followed by the more risk-on stuff later on. It just hasn't really been happening yet because I'm wrong, right? That's probably why. Tesla, what happens when you have copper and gold ratio bottoming? Well, over here it did nothing, for about a whole year, but eventually ended up catching up whenever copper and gold actually end up peaking over here. It was actually very, very bullish for Tesla, right? Same thing over here. It did nothing, but whenever it actually ended up peaking over here, it was actually pretty bullish for Tesla there for a period of time. Same thing over here, right? When it bottomed over here, it was the COVID crash. Whenever it peaked over here, that's when Tesla really peaked, right? And since then, Tesla's just been forming a big giant cup over here, and copper and gold ratio just went all the way down to zero. And next thing you know, you're finding the bottom over here, and Tesla looked like it could be breaking out soon. Like Tesla is showing a lot of relative strength here. It hasn't really broken down underneath the previous cycle high over here, which is some enormous strength. When it comes to Tesla, can it dip down and have a flash crash all the way down to 350s or whatever before going up? Maybe. I can never predict these things. I don't really care to. But it looks like we are at a pretty interesting zone over here where things just kind of consolidate before the next move up, right? That's what I see. Looking at the international market, what happens with copper and gold bottoms? Well, the Nikkei, the Japanese market, just keeps going up after that. The Nikkei Japanese market just keeps going up after that. Nikkei bottomed over here, kept going up after that. Nikkei's already been kind of front running the entire thing here, which is just kind of ridiculous. But hey, I guess they have enough money printing and liquidity, or their economy is actually doing really well. Like a lot of companies that hasn't really been growing for decades are actually starting to grow. I think they're actually starting to turn around the corner in terms of economic growth for decades. Regardless, I don't see the Nikkei crashing because I think there's some shift in terms of liquidity changes over here. Looking at the Chinese market, the Hang Seng Index, every time when it bottomed here, right? Kept going up after that. Over here, what happened? Parabolic move up. What happened over here? Parabolic move up. What happened over here? Maybe we break this trend line and make all-time highs. There is really no reason for China to stop printing money. They're going through a lot of deflation. Their population is not growing. There's really no reason for them to stop printing money. I actually think that the Hang Seng is getting started because there's a huge deleveraging event that happened over here for about like 3-4 years. A lot of deleveraging that happened over here, and there's a lot more room for money printing because they're going through a lot of deflation, both in terms of the housing bubble crash, both in terms of they have huge youth unemployment, both in terms of they have actual innovation over there. AI is taking off, robotics taking off, autonomous driving is taking off. A lot of things are happening. So there's a lot of deflationary forces. Like they really have a lot more room to print money, especially when copper and gold kind of bottom. The Japanese yen over US, like a lot of people saying worry about the yen carry trade, whatever, because Japanese bond yield's been going up, but it's just been going up to like a more normal level instead of being negative. I don't really see that big of a deal. If anything, looking at the Japanese yen over US dollar, it looks pretty weak. It looks like it probably wants to break down. It looks like copper gold ratio is also telling you very similar thing. You might have further weakness of the yen over USD, which is kind of like crazy. But anyway, but USD is also weak, so I don't know. Gold. Copper and gold ratio does not tell you too much about what gold would do. It might tell you that gold might be near the top within a few months or has topped. It's hard to say. Right here, top, yeah, a few months and then top. I don't know. Maybe it topped here. Maybe it goes up for another few months and top. But it's kind of toppy. It's more of a ratio that I care about, right? Copper should outperform gold here moving forward. And whenever you're talking about copper and outperforming gold, yeah, even, I mean they can go down together. Gold and copper can go down together. I just need copper to do better than gold. That's basically what I'm looking for. Yeah, bottom. Maybe it goes down. I don't know. I just need to do better than gold. I don't really care. Silver, does it mean that we've bottomed or topped here? It doesn't really tell you. Here is the top here, here's the top here. Here are a few months from the top. This is not entirely helpful when it comes to timing the top for silver, but I just wanted to throw in there just to say it's not, the silver kind of does its own thing anyway. I don't really know what to really say about that. Let's talk about individual sectors here. A lot of people worry about industrials being rotated into. Well, yeah, that's what happens in copper and gold ratio. It's bottoming. Like here, you have industrials doing very well. Here you have industrials doing very well. Here you have industrials doing very well. Here industrials doing very well. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing weird about it, right? XLP, consumer staples. A lot of people are saying, oh, rotation to defense, right? To defensive stocks because the market's going to crash. Well, that's what happens during every single bull market. You have copper and gold ratio bottoming. You have consumer staples doing relatively well because they are the backbone of the economy. Like you don't just have to invest in consumer staples just because you're afraid that Microsoft's going to zero, right? You don't have to invest in consumer staples just because you're worried that like JP Morgan stock is going to zero. If you have a good economy, if it's risk on, everything should go up together with it. And a lot of these things could be underperforming for quite some time. For example, during each time when the copper and gold ratio is bottoming, you have actually a relative underperformance of these consumer stable stocks for a long time. Here for about 4 or 5 months, here for about 4 or 5 months, here for about 2 or 3 months, here for about a whole year. They're breaking out because they suck for a very long time, right? And they break out as expected based on liquidity, right? A lot of people are worried about utilities. Well, utilities, if you have money, then you have money to pay bills, you have money to pay utilities. Like, I don't see being in utilities necessarily mean that, the economy is going to crash or anything like that. You generally actually have, whenever copper gold ratio actually bottom, you're actually close to like a local top of utilities. A lot of people are actually looking at utilities and saying, oh, things are being rotated in there. But whenever copper and gold tops, that's usually near the top of utilities, right? Like it shows relative weakness. You actually have a little bit of rotation away from utilities. Utilities been going straight up for about 2 years. It's been looking very, very bullish for 2 years, just like over here. Been bullish for about 2 years, right? It's been bullish over here for about a year. It's been bullish over here for about 2 or 3 years, right off the great financial crisis, right? So are we talking about continuation of this? Maybe, I don't know, maybe it goes up for another few months, but I don't think that's like a warning sign for the economy just because utilities are doing well. Energy stocks, this one's just all over the place. I don't really have copper and gold ratio bottom. It bottom over here. Copper gold ratio bottom. It topped over here. Bottom over here. Maybe it's topping. Maybe it's bottom. I don't know. You can do whatever you want with this one. I don't really think that it matters. I just want to make sure that it doesn't crash. As long as it doesn't crash, I'm okay. There really hasn't been that much concern over like inflations or anything like that anyway. So yeah, I don't think energy really tells you that much more about the great economy. Looking at like an energy stock like Chevron over the years, I do think that copper and gold ratio for energy stocks, for example, Chevron, actually it's fine. Looks like the bottom of gold, copper versus gold ratio looks like it actually marked a relative local bottom for Chevron. Maybe we're bottoming here after going down for about 3 years. Maybe we're bottom over here. Maybe it's just going to go up. It doesn't mean that we're entering crash because obviously these are some of whenever Chevron goes up, these are some of the most bullish times of the economy. Like I don't I don't have much else to say about financials. What happens when this happens? You have some relative weakness that goes on for about a few months. You're rotating to industrials, you're rotating all the other stuff until it rotates back and the financial does well again. Here, bottom. Here it lags for about a few months and it goes up. Here it lags for a few months and it goes up. Here it's been lagging for a few months. Maybe it lags for a bit longer before it goes up. I don't know. this relative weakness for financials is expected based on this part of the cycle. Looking at XLK is technology. Technology, same thing, very similar to financials. You have basically a few months of weakness here, 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 and here for financials when copper and gold ratio has bottomed. Here, same thing, you know, basically sideways, 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 until it's not, right? Until it's not, right? Until it's not, right? Until it's not, right? Does it crash down? Well, we had a COVID crash over here, but normally it doesn't. It just seems like you have some relative weakness here, and it just picks up whenever rotation is done, right? That was copper and gold ratio. I don't have cycle analysis for Palantir for you. It's just too new of a stock. I make separate videos and talk about it with Danny, but I when it comes to Palantir, I'm gonna say, I don't think it's gonna crash through like the double digits. I'm just gonna leave it as that. How much further it goes down short term, I don't know, and when it stops going down, I don't know. I have yet to see a good reaction from Palantir quite just yet, so there might be a little bit more like a base formation that I need to see before I'm convinced. But I still hold a majority of my shares. I'm just gonna let it ride because I think that this correction is mostly a rotationary correction, which is what my point is trying to say here. Whenever this rotation is done, I think everything is probably gonna run together. That's my suspicion. But I don't know when it's going to bottom or where. Chapter 2. Small caps. I hope I still have time. God, I just keep talking and talking. I find the small cap, the Russell 2000, the base formation, and the breakout of that base to be very telling for what happens with the other stuff. Basically, I think these two basically line up perfectly together. I spent about like half an hour talking about copper versus gold ratio. This basically lines up very well with the breakout of Russell 2000 or IWM into all-time highs. This is the backbone of the US economy. These are small cap stocks. When they break out, I think that generally leads into a more risky environment, even though these rotationary stuff can take months to happen, but it can happen over and over and over and over again, which is why I'm trying to show you here that it's been happening over and over again, right? You see the breakout over here. Okay, not exactly matching the bottom over here, but close enough, right? The breakout over here, match the bottom over here, breakout over here, match more or less the bottom over here, breakout over here, match the bottom over here. So if you're looking at on a similar manner, you're basically comparing large cap and small cap. I talk a lot about rotation from large cap to small caps, and that's been happening here. You know, large cap, when rotation, it doesn't mean that large cap has to crash. Rotation just means large cap does nothing and liquidity goes into small cap. That's what happened over here in the early 2013. That's what happens over here in late 2016 whenever IWM breaks out. The Qs, the large caps, does nothing. Same thing happened here around late 2020, right? The small caps really went parabolic. Large cap did nothing for months. And I think we're basically experiencing a very, very similar juncture over here. SPY, this is SP 500, basically showing the same thing. There's nothing else to add over here. The Russell 2000 small cap has a lot more industrials, which is why whenever Russell 2000 does well, industrial also does well. Basically, they're the same chart. There's not much else to say about that. Utilities, you can say that they also behave very, very similarly, you know, because they're more or less like the backbone of the economy. So I don't have much to say about that. All I'm trying to say is that whenever you have industrial and utilities doing well, and even with energy, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad for the economy, because liquidity should push everything up. Looking at SLP, same thing. Consumer staples, you actually have relatively bullishness here with consumer staples if IWM does well, right? Because a lot of the small cap stocks belong to that small cap, belong to like the consumer staples, industrials, and things like that. So this is not that surprising. Interesting, I think financial act very, very similar, maybe more or less to like large caps. There's a little bit of a stalling over here before it follows with the risk environment. So that's what rotation is. And also, this is XLK, which is technology, is basically following the large caps. That's what it is. Sideways doing nothing and then goes up together. I think there's nothing abnormal about it. Russell 2000 and gold, it doesn't, it could mark a little bit more like a local top, right? Whenever you get breakout of Russell 2000, it could mark a little bit of local top over here, a little local top over here, a little local top over here, maybe a little local top over here too. No guarantees, but that's what, you know, Russell 2000 have tended to do. Same thing with silver, a little bit local top here, local top here, local top here, maybe a local top over here with IWM breakout. You see how like this lines up with the economy, with what rotationary forces with the cycle pretty well. Copper is a little bit tricky, you know, I can't really get, like sometimes it's a local top, sometimes it's a local bottom. I can't really mark well with copper. But here's Bitcoin. And I think it's a very, very important point to talk about Bitcoin here. When you have a breakout in IWM, Bitcoin could do nothing for a few months. You actually show a little bit of a relative weakness here whenever you have IWM breakout here. Now, with that said, you have to understand that Bitcoin is a very immature asset back in 2012, 2013, right? It's relatively immature too back in 2016, 2017. So as far as I'm concerned, I think looking at Bitcoin and trying to predict economic cycle, it's a little bit going backwards. I'm going to show you some of the reasons as to why I think that is. I think Bitcoin probably runs more. Initially, it might have a lot more 4-year cycle based on the dynamics of Bitcoin halving. But now with institutional adoption, I really do think that is more just an asset, which is subjected to deleveraging, which is subjected to supply and demand dynamics from the overall market rather than like an isolated asset like it was before. Anyway, I digress. Bitcoin over here, relative weakness, right? Whenever you have breakout of the Russell 2000, relative weakness here before it runs up, relative weakness over here too during last cycle before it runs up, significantly relative weakness over here during this cycle, right? Which is just sad. This is just sad. Anyway, Ethereum, this is not unexpected. Again, it was a very immature asset here, so take that with a grain of salt. But significant underperformance of Ethereum in 2016 when Russell 2000 broke out. Underperformance here of Ethereum, and it did end up breaking out together with that November 2020 candle. But relative weakness over here, Ethereum versus small caps. Significant underperformance, just like 2016, compared to small cap breaking out, right? Very much in line in terms of what had happened before. XRP, interesting, right? Russell 2000 breakout, XRP breaks out a few months after that. Russell 2000 breaks out, XRP breaks out, you know, within like about 6 months. Russell 2000 breakout, XRP lagging over here just like it did over here. Very interesting, actually. I do wonder whether or not there's a lot of similarities between those two cycles. But anyway, others, again, is the cryptocurrency market cap excluding the top 10 coins. So you're talking about the more degen stuff. It looks very similar over here to 2016, whenever you have breakout of Russell 2000. Very similar morphology over here and here. The last cycle in 2020 was a little bit different. I think Reddit just decided just one run up at the same time. But before the cycle before that, you have a lot more rotationary forces going on before, you know, everything just kind of go up, and before the parabolic move of the others chart over here. So yeah, a little bit of delay there. Interesting. Doge, same thing, delayed by a few months, parabolic move up. Here, delayed by a couple months, parabolic move up here. Here, it's been sucking, kind of like it did over here. It sucks. It sucks here for about 3 months, right? It sucks over here for about like a whole year. It sucks over here for, like, honestly, for a whole year. It's not fun, right? But we might be at a juncture where we could be doing something here over the next few months here. Tesla actually follows IWM pretty well. It's pretty interesting. Even though it's like the Max 7 is no longer considered small caps, obviously. But each time when you have IWM breakout, it actually follows by Tesla doing relatively well. And during the breakout status over here, sometimes you can actually be doing nothing over here and actually be doing not much over here. So we're just maybe consolidating over here, wait for some rotational forces to be done before Tesla goes up. Who knows, right? Or maybe it goes down first before going up. Who knows? Nikkei, Japanese market, runs pretty well together with Russell 2000. If it breaks out, Japanese market does pretty well. You know, that's what it's been doing. Hang Seng, same thing. Whenever IWM breaks out, generally the Hang Seng does pretty well afterwards. Parabolic move up, 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 and then now I think we might be getting ready to break the trend line, go higher, is kind of my suspicion. With that said, Bitcoin just dropped by more than 50%, right? That means the stock markets must follow because Bitcoin is a leading economic indicator, right? Is there evidence for that? Is that something that is like just like a well accepted thing, or is there actually evidence for that? I'm not sure if there is much evidence for that. So if you're talking about the 4-year cycle, and a lot of people talk about 4-year cycle, and I'm like, okay, let's take a step back over here. 4-year cycle, fine. How do you measure the 4-year cycle? Do you measure the top or do you measure the bottom? Some people say you have to measure from the bottom. Let's measure from the bottom. 4 years, right? 4 years, roughly 48 months. 4 years, okay, from this bottom over here, and granted, this is a very immature asset back here. 46 months from bottom to bottom, fine. 40 months from bottom to bottom, fine, roughly 4 years. 47 months from bottom to bottom, okay, fine, roughly 4 years. If you can have a cycle that only has 40 bars, then you can have a cycle that only has 39 bars. That's what I would argue, right? If you can have a cycle, I'm going to repeat, you have a cycle of 40 bars from bottom to bottom. This is a cycle bottom over here, by the way. It's not this one over there. This is a lower low over there compared to that. So if you use the cycle bottom over here to there, and that's the absolute cycle bottom over there, 40 bars. How much has it been since the cycle bottom over here to current month right now? 39 bars. Is it possible? Yeah. What is the longest cycle Bitcoin has from bottom to bottom? 47 bars. Okay, so can it suck for another 8 months? It can. There are a lot of people citing October, November 2026. Can it suck for another like 8 months? Yeah, it can. Could this be a bottom based on previous cycle behavior? Yes, it can. That's the truth, right? I'm not. This is a very limited sample size, by the way, but I'm not saying anything that's not true. Anyway, comparing Bitcoin to IWM, does Bitcoin predict what the backbone of the economy, what small cap stocks are going to do? When Bitcoin bottoms, does it mean that the market bottoms, right? Because it's a leading indicator. Let's look at that. Well, that's a pretty good bottom over there, although at that point, I don't think Bitcoin is a leading indicator for anything in 2021. 2011. I don't think Bitcoin is a leading indicator for anything. It's kind of irrelevant. Okay, so all right, becoming a little bit of larger assets here, great. I still don't think it's a leading indicator for anything. It bottomed in 2015. Doesn't mean that the economy has bottomed over here. Doesn't mean that IWM has bottomed. No, it bottomed in like early 2016, right? Well, okay, I guess you can say it's a leading indicator. So what is a leading indicator? It's leading its bottom first, so IWM is going to bottom later. Or are you talking about Bitcoin's bottom here, so IWM is going to do well? Like that doesn't. Anyway, it's IWM kept going down for like 6, 7, 8 months after that. Here, Bitcoin bottomed, right? Oh, great, the economy is going to do well. You have a parabolic move up over here. Well, IWM just crashed all the way down here during COVID. Right? It's not there's no leading indicator for anything. And then same thing over here. Bitcoin bottom over here in November 2022. IWM made another crazy bottom over here in October 2023. And then another crazy bottom over here in April 2024. Wait, no, 2025, sorry. April 2025. Did Bitcoin tell you that? No, it tells you nothing. Bitcoin tells you absolutely nothing during that period of time of what the stock market is going to do. Absolutely nothing, right? So I'm not sure if I would make that argument, because this is just kind of like, okay, so Bitcoin bottom, what happens to the stock market after that? What happens to the Russell 2000 and the market overall? Okay, IWM goes up, great, bottom, awesome. Okay, Bitcoin bottom, market goes down and up. Okay, that's not very helpful. Bitcoin bottom, okay, market goes down and go up. That's not very helpful. Bitcoin bottom here, market goes up. Well, it went down and down over here. That's not very helpful at all, right? So I don't know why you would look at Bitcoin as an economic indicator. You can say that it's a source of a reflection of what liquidity is doing. Sure, just like the global markets, all of those are signs of telling you what market is doing. Does it tell you what the QQQ is going to do? Does it tell you whether or not large cap is going to crash? When Bitcoin, or does it mark the bottom? Actually, it marks the bottom pretty well for large caps. If this is the bottom over here for Bitcoin, that was like a pretty decent local bottom. That's the bottom over here. That's a pretty decent local bottom. Bottom, 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 bottom. If this is the bottom, I think the market bottomed, right? But if you go, I suppose if it's a leading indicator, there's no sign that this is a leading economic indicator at all. Gold, it doesn't really tell you much. It could be a local top, could be a local bottom, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't really matter. Same thing with silver. It's like a crap indicator for silver. It could be the top, it could be the bottom. It's like, it doesn't tell you anything, right? Yeah, so that's kind of my beef with looking at Bitcoin. Now, I'm measuring it from bottom to bottom, right? That's how I'm supposed to measure. This is a 4-year cycle minus 2 months. This is a 4-year cycle minus 8 months. This is a 4-year cycle minus 1 month. Is it a 4-year cycle minus like 9 months? Or is it going to be a 4-year cycle minus 1 month? I don't know, right? I have no idea. Anyway, if you don't measure from bottom to bottom, why don't we measure from top to top? Because that seems to match the 4-year cycle better, right? Well, here you have how many months is that? 2.5 years. Here, okay, 49. That's a 4-year cycle. That's close to 48. That's 47. Okay, that's a 4-year cycle. That's a 4-year cycle right there, right? That top, right? Does it tell you where the bottom is? Not really. Here, bottom within like a year. Here, bottom here within a year and a half. Here, bottom there within about 5 months. Does it tell you the bottom? No, it doesn't. Right? Does the top tell you the top for IWM, for small caps? Yeah, here, that's a pretty good top right there. It just kind of kept going up for like a whole year. Yeah, it's kind of kept going up for like a whole year. Yeah, that's kind of the top. Okay, sure. Right. Yeah, I don't know what it's going to do. Leading indicator. What about the NASDAQ? What about the QQQ? Bitcoin topped, right? Oh no. It just kept going up. Everybody has to buy index fund from their 401k. You know, it doesn't really matter. Same thing over here. Bitcoin topped. Look at how nicely NASDAQ just kept going up. Bitcoin topped here. NASDAQ kept going up here for about half a year. Sure, it's followed by some volatility here, but it just kept on going up over here during this time, right? Oh no, Bitcoin top. The stock market is top. Once. Once. So yeah, Bitcoin crash, the stock market must go to zero. Does that make sense to you? Does that make sense to you? I don't know. Okay. IWM, QQQ, Tesla. Bitcoin topped. Tesla must crash, right? Nah. Maybe. Okay. Where are we? I don't know. I just showed you, like, I have no idea what like, is this like a, does Bitcoin tell you Tesla is going to crash? I mean, you could argue that Tesla has done nothing over here, and that's correction through sideways over here, and Bitcoin's doing the same, right? I don't know. Does it tell you that Bitcoin has bottom over here? Maybe Tesla's, I don't know. I have no idea. This is not very helpful. I guess what I'm trying to say is that if you're looking at Bitcoin as a leading indicator, I think you're looking backwards because it's now just starting to be a more mature asset over the last 5 years. I don't think it's necessarily like a leading indicator for anything. If you're looking at IWM, if you're looking at the second dip over here, now think about the imaginary line here. IWM has a hard time breaking through this level over here, and it formed two bottoms over here, right? Bottom number 1, bottom number 2 over here. The second bottom, when IWM forms the second bottom, that's when Bitcoin goes parabolic. There could be a lag, right? Draw an imaginary line over here, right? IWM has a hard time breaking through this level over here. There are two bottoms over here, or you can even use this over here as a bottom too, right? Whenever it gets to the second bottom, that's when Bitcoin goes sideways and it goes on this parabolic bull run. Draw an imaginary line over here, right? You have two bottoms, right? Whenever IWM gets to the second bottom and then breaks out and make all-time high, that's when Bitcoin goes sideways there and then goes parabolic. Draw an imaginary line over here on IWM from here going all the way here. Imagine this is the first bottom. Imagine that's the second bottom. That's the second bottom over there. Does that mean that Bitcoin shows some relative weakness before going up? Maybe. Maybe this is very similar to relative weakness that's showing over there afterwards for months. Maybe it's the same as the relative weakness that is showing there after months. With the exception, this time it actually goes down, right? Maybe this is just a longer cycle. I don't know. I do find IWM is probably a better leading indicator for Bitcoin than Bitcoin being a leading indicator for a stock market. That's my point. I also find that copper and gold ratio is a better leading indicator for Bitcoin. And if you're looking at, and I just spent like the first half an hour talking about that. You were talking about copper versus gold bottoming, being a beginning of the parabolic bull run for Bitcoin. That holds better than using Bitcoin as a leading indicator and going the other way around. That is my point. I'm gonna end the show here. I know you guys probably like ask a lot of different questions and things like that. I'm gonna run. It's 5 o'clock. I gotta make some xiaolongbao and whatnot. Like it's stuff that I have to do. So I just want to come here and do what I have to do here before I do what I have to do over there. Picture this. This is what I call a Gann square. This is the QQQ. This goes all the way from the Great Financial Crisis to the recent days. This thing has followed great market symmetry over and over and over again. And each of this arc here means something. Each of these lines here means something. This is the area where price struggled. And it basically breakthrough, backtest for a long time before going up to the next level. Here is where price struggled, breakthrough and then backtest it multiple times before going up to the next level. Here is where price has struggled, right? Here is where price has struggled and it came back, backtested the angle and struggled at that arc here a little bit more, struggled at the arc right there a little bit more, struggled with the horizontal line there a little bit more, struggled at the arc right there a little bit more. We've broken through all that. The question is, does it mean we're going to gravitate up to the next arc here, kind of like we did over here? Well, we did backtest all this stuff over here, didn't we? You know, maybe that was the backtest over here. Maybe this is it, right? And then we just go up from here. Here, we just backtest the arc here multiple times and we just ran up. Here, we backtest the arc over here multiple times and we just ran up. Is there a possibility for price, for QQQ, right now it's 600, is there a possibility for QQQ to crash all the way down to 500? And backtest the horizontal line down here. A flash crash, again, even though we just have flash crash less than a year ago. Is that possible? It's always possible. It is always possible. If it crashes down, that would be a great risk-reward ratio down here. Right? 450 or 480, 500, that'd be a great risk-reward ratio down here. I'll be like, heck yeah. Because what are you looking at here? You're looking at upside of about 60%. Depends on where it hits the arc. If it hits the arc over here, maybe more like 50%. You know, slow burn kind of thing. If it hits the arc up here, yeah, about 60%, right? 60% upside, maybe 20% downside. I'll take that any time of the day. I'll take that any time of the day. I just kind of rant on and on for about an hour on a PowerPoint slide. You have just witnessed, you have just voluntarily, how many slides do I have like in this stack here? How many slides do I have in this deck here? I have 63 slides. I spend a minute on each slide, just like you're supposed to during a PowerPoint presentation. You guys have just gone through a PowerPoint presentation because you're masochistic in a voluntary way. I don't know what's wrong with you, but I'm going to go. Thank you so much for joining the live show here. And if I have time, I'm taking today and tomorrow off. If I have time, if I wake up tomorrow, I might do a market opening stream. Because these are like my mental days that I'm taking off from my work. And this is fun. I just spent the last 3 hours making a PowerPoint presentation. And I just went live with you all. I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't even know if I'm right or not. But I'm seeing these things and I just can't help but to express it. Because I'm a very expressive meow. Y'all have a good one. Happy Lunar New Year to everybody for those who celebrate. if you hate the Lunar New Year, then forget I said that. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the week. Take care, bye.